Hi, my name is Reed Silverne. The name of the show is Fed Pride. The reason it's called Fed Pride is because I'm a federal worker and proud of it. For me today, it's Friday, the 16th of January, 2009. For you, it's probably the 18th of January, which is Sunday, or the 20th, which is a Tuesday. Consequently, whatever I talk about today, and I'm talking right now before the inauguration, and before what sounds like there's going to be a ceasefire in Gaza. We'll believe that when I see it. By the time you see it, either those activities will have happened or they'll have fallen apart. Needless to say, no matter what, everything I say will probably be obsolete by the time you see it. So I am my own engineer. This is live to tape. If I fall off my chair, you're going to see me fall off my chair. If I do something stupid, like accidentally cut off my sound, which I've done before, you'll not hear the result of that. So what am I going to talk about today? Mostly, I intended to talk about the Gaza situation, but there's been some big events, at least as of Friday, and probably the biggest is the passing of the approval to release the second half of the TARP bailout. So that's $350 billion, and that is nothing compared to the stimulus bill, which is the first thing on President Obama's agenda. And now I'm going to say President Obama because some of you might be watching on Tuesday, and I doubt if you're going to bother to watch on Tuesday because if you're like me, you're going to be watching the inauguration. Plus, there's been lots and lots of hearings. For some reason, the Senate and the House start before the new president is inaugurated. I never really got that before. So in this case, because Obama was so far ahead of the game in setting up his cabinet, in doing his picks, that they are already deep into the confirmation system and the confirmation hearings. And there's been confirmation hearings of the Attorney General, who Eric Holder, I believe, who had some problems when he was Deputy Attorney General at the end of the Clinton administration. He's the guy that signed off or sent forward the Mark Rich pardon. So he's been getting a little bit of flack about that. Hillary Clinton has already gone before the Senate in some cases. Janet Napolitano, our Arizona governor, who's going to be the Secretary of Homeland Security. I've seen her on C-SPAN, and a bunch of others. The Agriculture Secretary has already begun to testify. So there's just a whole series of confirmation hearings happening already. So it may be much quicker than usual that the transition will occur and a lot of these people will get confirmed. If not, they'll be acting secretary this and acting secretary that. I remember when Bush took over, it was months later, there were still some acting secretaries. So they've been, and that was a Republican Congress and a Republican president. Now we have a Democratic Congress and a Democratic president. And it looks like Obama's starting off strong, if nothing else. At least he's made a lot of progress in picking his cabinet. And on top of that, he's had a legislative victory, and he's not even president already. So there was a lot of resistance to the TARP bill. The Democrats were very disappointed that, boom, $350 billion disappeared, and Bank of America still needs more money. Citibank is still asking for more money. In my opinion, what it was aimed for really did occur with the first round. And what it aimed for, what people don't realize, is that we were on the edge of a credit crisis that would have shut down banks, shut down industry, shut down retail throughout the entire country. Some of the things had been taken over by the Fed. For instance, people don't realize that the commercial paper market had completely collapsed. Commercial paper market is the market that's used to so that stores can buy inventory. They buy inventory for a month on a short-term paper, and they pay it back, and they keep basically the margin of the profit. A lot of companies will issue this short-term paper, basically borrowing money on the short term for whatever the current interest rate is, and they actually pay their payroll. That market had completely collapsed, was taken over by the Federal Reserve, and is still under the control of the Federal Reserve because it had never been reconstituted. So that was just one of many, many cases where either the Federal Reserve or the government itself had to step in to keep the credit moving. Basically, in a normal situation, for every dollar that's printed, it goes around 6 or 7 times. There's a money multiplier, and there's money supply figures called M1, M2. One is all cash and immediately sellable securities and bonds. The other one is other kinds of assets that are transferable, so including cash and treasury bonds and so on and so forth. So these money supply figures mean nothing now, because in a normal situation, the money supply comes in there. Basically, the money supply multiplied by the monetary multiplier basically gives you the amount of money out there in the economy, and you tell whether it's growing or whether it's not, and people are able to figure out whether there's too much money chasing too few goods, in which case you're likely to have inflation, or there's not enough money chasing all the goods, in which case you're likely to have a shortage and a recession situation. Well, this situation is where the money wasn't circulating practically at all. The commercial paper had collapsed, so that the small businesses and regular and medium-sized businesses and retail weren't getting loans. Obviously, that was recreated because we had a Christmas season. There would have been no Christmas season because stores would not have been able to finance their Christmas inventory, and everybody that sells things to stores would have been unable to pay their people and to deliver articles to the stores. We could have had the Great Depression. This is basically what happened in the Great Depression. Banks froze up. There were runs on the banks. Banks stopped loaning to other banks, and there was just different institutions, companies, banks, everything that just pop, went out of business, and then were unable to pay the next business, which went out of business and unable to pay the next business. That was prevented. One of the things that was measured that shows that that was about to happen and that was in the process of happening was the overnight LIBOR, which is the London Interbank, I believe, operational rate. I keep on forgetting what the O stands for. But what that is it's the amount of interest that a bank charges another bank for an overnight loan. Why do banks have overnight loans? Well, if you have an account with Wells Fargo and you go to an ATM machine at the Bank of America, basically Bank of America is giving you the money, and Wells Fargo is borrowing it from Bank of America overnight. They pay them back the next day. If the LIBOR is 4%, went above 4%, the overnight LIBOR, then basically the Wells Fargo is paying Bank of America more than the charge for using the other ATM machine. And some don't charge for ATM machines at all. So basically, if that had gone on very much longer than it did, and this was the couple weeks when the TARP was first passed and it finally stabilized, we may have had a situation where banks, ATM machines would not operate outside of the bank that they were in. So if you were out of town and you had a credit union and you wanted to use an ATM machine at a regular bank, you would not have been able to get your money. So we came just this close. We came this close from all of the retail outfits in the country. Probably the only one that would stay open would probably be Walmart that could finance itself. Being unable to finance just its day-to-day, month-to-month, week-to-week inventory. So we got very, very close. And the TARP did settle the situation. The overnight LIBOR went from well over, I think, 3 or 4% down to 0.1%. Actually lower than it was before the crisis started. And that's because all the Treasury bonds and the Treasury rate is now close to zero. So we were in some deep trouble when they passed the TARP the first time. However, a lot of abuse occurred. The most famous is AIG having a offsite in a fancy resort. I mean, how dumb can they be? Even if they usually had an offsite in a fancy resort, how did that look politically now that they were working with U.S. taxpayer money? It was stupid. Some of the CEOs and the executives that had lost their shirts and needed to be bailed out by the American taxpayer decided to use some of that money to pay themselves bonuses for losing money, an insult to the American people. And Paulson did nothing about it. He was the last Secretary of the Treasury. The next Secretary of the Treasury, by the way, he has had some hearings as well, and he's not looking very good because he worked for I believe the IMF, and he forgot to pay some of his taxes. Apparently he's paid up right now, but it doesn't look good. So it looks like because we have this crisis that he's probably going to get confirmed, but certainly he just walked right into a firestorm over probably a pretty minor issue. So those are the kind of things that are occurring. The next thing that Obama wants to push, okay, first of all, about the second layer of the TARP, and I don't have the toxic assets rescue package, I think is what it stands for. I could be wrong about that, but I know toxic assets is the TA part of it. And basically what Paulson did is he realized these toxic assets, which are the derivatives that cause this whole problem. Anybody who's been watching my show knows that I'm outraged about derivatives and all that stuff. But nevertheless, and a bank lost $100 billion on worthless derivatives that were backed by mortgages. Basically, they have a leverage of 20 to 1. In other words, they have to have 5% capital, and for every dollar of capital, they can loan $20. Well, if you're losing $100 billion, you can't loan $2 trillion. So the original idea was to take these off the table and to have the government buy them up, and then eventually they'd be worth something. Well, what they found out was that these derivatives were supposed to be asset-backed derivatives, but what they found out is that they were pass-through derivatives. The seller of the derivative didn't sell shares in the mortgage pool that he had, so the buyer of the derivative basically had zero value. They were worthless. And there are trillions of dollars of these things out there, and the government didn't want to pay for the whole thing. So Paulson decided to put money into the banks, basically buying preferred shares, a form of nationalization, which is the way the Europeans handle that situation. So what's going to happen with the second half? Well, according to Larry Summers, and he's going to be the economics chief of Obama, $50 to $100 billion will be reserved to actually put a program together to bail out people who are being foreclosed. One of the reasons that these derivatives became worthless is because supposedly they're based on foreclosure rates which went above a level that rendered them worthless. So the idea is to lower the foreclosure rate, and maybe we might get some value out of that. But the other idea is to try to help people. And basically, if the government's going to bail out the most vicious, the thieves, the people who brought us to this situation, the people who should have known better, people with IQs of 180, who made $100 million in fees, buying things and creating instruments that was just fraud and thievery, that maybe we can use some to help some real people over here, people who haven't stolen anything. Although some of the, a very small percentage of the mortgage people lied on their applications, and there's investigations of those people too. So then there is the stimulus package. Now, a lot of people get these two things mixed up. The TARP, the bailout, that is now passed, and there's been an approval. Actually, the House hasn't voted on it, but to vote it down, both houses of Congress, Senate and House, have to vote against it. The Senate's already voted for it, so it's a fait accompli that one's going in. So the minute Obama gets in there, his guy, Gertner, the Secretary of Treasury, is going to have $350 billion to play with. But then there's a stimulus package. That's $825 billion, not million, billion with a B. What's in it? $275 billion of tax cuts, $500 for an individual, $1,000 for a couple, to everybody. Basically the same kind of thing that Bush did when he had his recession. Then they're going to increase the depreciation from 2 years to 5 years. So that's going to basically reduce taxes to small business. Aid to states for health care. Increase aid for Medicaid, high priority to public safety, $7 billion to law enforcement, $117 billion to education, building schools and hopefully putting people to work building schools, $106 billion for the unemployed and needy, $43 billion to extend jobless benefits. Well, I think in any recession we've usually done that. $39 billion to keep people under health insurance that have been laid off. $20 billion to increase food stamps, and $4 million it says, for Social Security. I'm surprised that that's even noted. $90 billion for infrastructure, highway and bridge construction. They're going to spend $31 billion to increase insulation in buildings, especially every single federal building in the country, to reduce our energy use. $19 billion for water, $10 billion for transit, $54 billion for energy, $32 billion for a smart grid. A lot of the problems is that we don't have, let's see if we can get back to America over here, but a lot of the grid is not connected. There's lines east to west, but not necessarily north to south to connect it. That was one of the problems during the electricity crisis in California that was started by Enron. Basically, there were other lines that could have been rerouted, but they were not connected. So that's a problem too. And then renewable technology, wind energy, solar, and all that good stuff. And $22 billion for public housing, basically for more energy efficiency. and $16 billion for science and technology. Everybody has their little hand in there. And then $48 billion that's not even explained. So that's basically what the $825 billion stimulus package goes to. Now, the bottom line is that if things go back to normal, there's too much money in the money supply right now. In order to keep the economy going at all, with the banks not loaning, with businesses not spending, with people not going to the mall and spending their money, the flow of money, the velocity of money is slowed down. So basically the federal government can put a lot more money into the money supply and needs to in order to keep things going at all. But if we have a situation where things go back to normal all of a sudden, then there's way too much money in the money supply. 2 or 3 times as much money as normal. And if that happens and the velocity and the use of money goes to normal, we could have a terrible inflation problem. So they're going to have to worry about that. Meanwhile, on the Gaza front, it looks like Egypt has a proposal to go back to the Palestinian, to the Rafah Agreement of 2005 and put the Palestinian Authority in charge of the Rafah crossing with Turkish monitors and Egyptian monitors, and to bring in experts to make sure that they don't keep on digging these terrible tunnels and bringing in missiles to threaten Israel. Is it a step forward? Well, it's not overthrowing Hamas for Israel, but it is a tremendous step forward because everybody has been complaining and saying that Israel is violating human rights and starving babies and all this stuff, mainly because the crossings to Gaza were closed. Now, they could have been opened at any time had the Hamas government just been willing to go back and to carry out an agreement that was already made that puts the President Abbas's presidential guard on the border and basically keeps them from being able to bring in missiles from Iran. So the other really big thing that's occurred is there is now an agreement between Israel and the United States regarding a commitment to try to prevent arms smuggling through up here at every level from Iran, with ships going through here and coming up into Egypt and then being filtered through a bunch of intermediaries, a lot of them Bedouins in the Sinai, in order to stop bringing missiles into Gaza, which is what's been irritating the Israelis in the first place. What else has happened? First of all, Israel, of course, if you went to the press and pulled up CNN, Israel hit another UN facility, food is burning, 3 people wounded and all that stuff. But what was a little bit more important, just a tad more important than that, is Israel hit and killed the head of the interior minister, the guy who put together the Hamas military. He died. They hit his brother's house, and they were having a meeting of the high command of the Hamas military. They knocked out the head of the entire Hamas police military security complex. The number 2 guy, who is the head of Hamas security, and who's Abu Salah. The guy they hit was named Siam, who was the number 3 guy in all Hamas, and probably the number 1 guy when it comes to Hamas being powerful, because he was in control of the Hamas security force, intelligence force, and police force. Then the head of the internal security for Hamas, Abu Salah, and then the commander of the Gaza City front, and 6 other high important military Hamas people. They were all knocked out. The entire building was flattened. It became a crater. And Hamas went ahead and said, we're going to get our revenge. Oh, yeah. The Israelis are just shaking in their boots. And meanwhile, It's very, very likely, but you'll find out on Sunday because you'll be laughing at me then, that there'll be a voluntary unilateral ceasefire. Israel won't be going farther forward. They've pretty much taken over half of Gaza City, and they've knocked out the heads of the military, even though they haven't knocked out the military. Thank you very much for watching. This is Fed Pride. Thank you.